South Africa's electricity pricing system is once again under the spotlight following the announcement of the revised electricity pricing policy. The General Industry Workers Union of South Africa has strongly rejected what it describes as the growing marketisation and liberalisation of the country's electricity system, arguing that electricity is a basic public necessity rather than a commodity. The union is raising concerns about the impact of cost-reflective tariffs on working-class households, while also questioning electricity concessions granted to major industries and calling for greater public ownership, transparency, and affordable access to electricity. Now, to unpack this morning and the concerns of the union, its vision for South Africa's electricity future, we're joined by Shop Steward Ferron Pedro. Good morning and welcome to the Breakfast Rush on Radio Al Ansar.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
It's a pleasure. Thank you for making time for our YouTube channel this morning as well. Tell us, your union has strongly rejected the revised electricity pricing policy. What are your biggest concerns about the policy?
Right. Government has made the argument that this policy is meant to increase transparency and make things more clear and even across the nation. But behind the language of transparency lies a fundamental restructuring of our energy system, designed to transition that system into a commercialized, private-led market, which you can see, for example, in our housing market or in various other markets for essential goods, that there's incredible inequality in our country. And so we reject the idea that basic dignity, which electricity affords, basic services like electricity and water afford, must yield to private profits. It cannot be directed by private profits. So we reject the policy's primary assumptions that households must bear the full commercial cost of basic services like electricity. These should be subsidized for the poorest households, and that's the majority of people in South Africa are energy poor. We're also concerned in the way in which the policy adapts the system for private generators, for electricity traders and wholesale markets. We do recognize that the way our current system and our transmission system and generation, there are huge problems, but our concern is shifting private financing costs, margins, and shareholder profits onto the public. If you are going to be inviting investment, that investment needs to be de-risked, and that risk is taken by the public. And we see that with the most recent tariff increases, which fell onto the public. So there are a number of issues with the policy, but our main concern is that this is an attempt to move electricity from a basic service or a basic human right, a basic socioeconomic right, to something that is a commodity which you have to be rich enough to afford. That's a major concern for us and for the working class in general.
Mm-hmm. The union argues that electricity is a public necessity and not an ordinary commodity. So how are rising electricity costs currently affecting workers and ordinary households, particularly those who may not qualify for indigent support but are still struggling with the cost of living?
I mean, even those who qualify for indigent support, many of them are not getting those free basic services. And we have a huge bureaucratic hurdle in getting that to ordinary people. But if we look at I spoke about the most recent tariff increases. I'm sure you've discussed it on your show. Electricity prices have skyrocketed. Since 2007, it's gone up 6 times faster than inflation. Now, many workers, we have to fight just to get when we have wage negotiations, just to get wages not cut, just to get it up to inflation. an increase plus inflation. It's so difficult. Bosses act as if that's such a luxury. But really what's happening is if you don't get an increase plus inflation, you are reducing your wages. Every year, your wages are reducing. Now, with electricity prices have skyrocketed 6 times faster than inflation. Imagine how that has cut into wages. The poorest 60% of South African households are now forced to spend more on electricity than on basic food staples like maize meal or and bread or transport costs, which limits economic opportunities. So it's really an erosion of real wages, in other words, through the system.
So the union has raised concerns about large corporations being able to negotiate electricity prices below standard tariffs. What is the union's position on these negotiated agreements, particularly when they are justified as a way to protect jobs and industrial capacity?
Of course, we support protecting local industries and jobs. That is a given. We feel like government is not doing enough to support local industries and jobs. But we absolutely reject a lopsided system where the public fiscus absorbs all the risks while public corporations retain unrestricted control over their profits. So if we're going to have these sweetheart corporate deals where mechanisms for major energy-intensive corporations are put in place to reduce how much electricity how much the cost of electricity is for their operations, but then force unyielding, cost-reflective tariffs on ordinary citizens. That's clearly a double standard. That is not. You can see the intention there cannot be to support the poorest of the poor, to support job creation. We've seen continuous jobless growth in our country. When there is growth, it's often jobless growth because these interventions are not working for ordinary workers, for our members, and for the broader working class. So we can't use workers and workers' wages and our very, very limited disposable incomes, not disposable incomes, our incomes for essential goods as bargaining chips with corporations. That's what's happening. We're using the public and our wages as ways to say, corporations, please stay here, don't leave and cut jobs, but then punishing workers to do that. It's not an effective strategy. It hasn't seen to be effective. We're still struggling with crazy unemployment, retrenchments, and wage increases that are not sufficient for people to meet their household needs. So we need a different kind of strategy. The way in which government, the neoliberal strategy, this market-based strategy does not work for people who don't have capital. It does not work for most of us who have been denied access to land, to businesses that have grown over generations. There are ways in which this is a specific context and we can't just impose our policies that might work for the World Bank and the IMF here, not if your priorities are the people, not if your priorities are making sure that our country is actually developing and ordinary people are included in economic activity.
Yeah. As a final question this morning, if your union believes the current direction is not the answer, what alternative electricity system is the union proposing?
Well, look, if we don't want any more blank checks to corporations. We've seen that not work in so many areas, and we had part of this difficulty with our energy tariff structure now is that we've been locked into agreements with renewable energy private or independent private producers who are insisting that they maintain the cost, the price that they've agreed to in their contract. But now electricity is much cheaper, right? So actually we're paying for earlier bad decisions based on context, based on the information that people had. So we're saying just no more blank checks, right? Public resources must require legally binding social guarantees. So if private corporations expect public infrastructure to sustain them, they need the roads, they need, it's not just workers, but workers and their families. So there needs to be there's a mother, there are caretakers, there's a lot of unpaid work happening to support that worker to go and make profits for that corporation. So the notion that we're not in a society where public infrastructure and public goods must be sustained for the broader public interest is just not tenable. It doesn't actually make sense. It doesn't fit with the facts. Any discounted electricity agreements with a corporation must be legally conditioned upon strict enforceable commitments. There should be no retrenchments, no job cuts in those places, and there needs to be public consultation and union participation, democratic participation. We need to see the full financial records of those recipient companies, and that must be public and to workers. But we definitely need to eliminate commercial confidentiality, and we definitely need to look into state equity ownership. Where sustained public subsidies are required to keep an industry afloat, the state must take corresponding equity and ownership stakes rather than endlessly subsidizing private shareholders. So if we're talking about meaningful transformation, and there are ways in which government is trying to do that, for example, expanding free basic electricity in this electricity pricing policy. But trying to do that and without trying to transform some of the structures that have put us in a position where we're struggling in an energy crisis, we're not going to be able to really make any sort of meaningful differences. So we need state equity, we need labor and investment pledges. So if we're going to be expanding, we need to make sure that there are mandated requirements to maintain and expand local production and make concrete domestic investments, especially with our renewable energy, with the renewable energy boom. We're not seeing those benefits really reaching ordinary working class people, and that's because it's so market led. So we sustain our rights to collective bargaining rights, but we must ensure that there are decent and living wages for people in corporations that are getting any kind of guarantees and support.
Thank you very much for your time this morning, Ferron Pedro, the General Industries Workers Union of South Africa Shop Steward. Have yourself a wonderful day.
Thank you. You too.
TBR.